Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, or as you say in Germany, good afternoon. I hope you had a good lunch, and that, but not too good, because we've got some very interesting sessions coming up this afternoon. Just to clarify, this session's on sustainability. So if you're interested in the in-plant logistics or feeding the line and the supply chain session, then that's in the other room. And if you are in the other room and you want to be in sustainability, then you should come back. Unfortunately, you can't hear me, but at least I've made the announcement. So I think we had a good morning, some very interesting presentations, very interesting thoughts and questions that came through. So I'm sure we will continue it this afternoon. So this is towards the sustainable supply chain. I think for me, the main question that I'll have in my mind as the presentations are going on is, do we mean it? Do we really mean it? So we'll hear some presentations from a car maker, giving us a car maker view on what their plans and requirements are, and then from a couple of logistics providers, very different logistics providers in different sectors, to give us their views on what they feel is happening from a sustainability viewpoint in automotive and logistics and supply chain. So to open up this session, I'm delighted to welcome my young friend, John Buchanan, the manager of UK PPM Material Planning and Logistics from Ford. John.
Oh, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you, Louis. As you just said, yes, I've come over from the UK. I'm Ford's UK manager of PPM, Program and Pre-Production Management. But I have another hat that I like to wear, which is also, some of you have maybe met me before in this role as sort of global lead on sustainable and green logistics within Ford. So what I'd like to do is take you through some of the key topics for us in sustainability in Ford as a typical car maker. And I think we've got three presentations lined up for you, and they're all slightly different formats, different angles, which I hopefully will help look at things from different angles. Do I have a thing to press the... Sorry, you can see this is a well planned. Unfortunately, I was enjoying my apple crumble when I probably should have been practicing this. There we go. Thank you. Okay, well, first of all, how is sustainability and environment seen at Ford? Well, our executive chairman, Bill Ford, is very strong on the whole subject, and he sums it up by saying that our economic and environmental goals are aligned. In fact, we believe that the best way for us to be more profitable is to make our business and products more sustainable. And it's a picture of one of our more recent products, our Ford Mondeo Hybrid, which, I mean, this isn't an advert, but I've got one, I love it. But the point of putting this on is that we're at a time of change. It's quite exciting. I started off as an engineer, and for about 100 years, all car engines and vehicles look pretty much the same. And apart from the electronics, Henry Ford probably would have figured out everything about them. And then suddenly we've got a revolution of different designs coming up, different engines, different power packs, hybrid engines, plug-in hybrids and fuel cells, all sorts of possibilities. So it's a very interesting time. And during this time of innovation, it's a question of seeing what's going to succeed. So what does sustainable mean? Well, sustainability covers quite a broad range of topics. At Ford, sustainability is defined as a business model that creates value consistent with the long-term preservation and enhancement of environmental, social, and financial capital. It's all about having a business that's strong going forward, that's good for our customers, and also good for our environment, the world we live in. And to give you an example of the different aspects involved, I've pulled together some topics here. Clearly, by far the biggest impact that as a car maker we have on the environment is actually the product design itself, the engine technologies, the manufacturing footprint. And with that, there's a material usage. And there's a lot of pressure. There's teams working on looking at having more reusable, recycled material in our cars. There's a good example is our new F-150 has got some of the seat material comes from recycled plastic bottles. So something like 5 million plastic bottles a year are going into it. And the energy usage and emissions. And there's a variety of involved there. There's energy usage in the manufacturing plants with emissions, both the ones we tend to think of in terms of environment CO2, but also things like solvent emissions. So there's been big steps by all the manufacturers to move to water-based paints rather than solvent-based paints. Water usage is a big one. Plants are looking to monitor all their water usage, recycling water, having settling pools and so on, and we've been making significant advances year on year on water usage. Waste avoidance, again, and is sort of, you can understand, as any business, we're trying to reduce our waste. Extra pressures on this because of the costs of landfill have forced us to rethink a lot of our approaches and looking at how to avoid waste or to keep waste within a site by putting it into burning for energy and so on. And another sort of area, another dimension of sustainability is on the social side, corporate social responsibility, and together with supply chain transparency. And this is a very big issue for all of us involved in big companies to understand our supply chain and make sure that it's a supply chain that we're proud to have, proud to support, proud to work with. And so there's a lot going on, a lot of initiatives in terms of supplier audits, going into the supply base and checking for things like, particularly things like making sure there's no underage employees, making sure overtime's paid, all that kind of thing, health and safety, etc. Conflict materials is a relatively minor one, but it's one making sure that when you go dig deep down in the supply chain to tier 4, tier 5, make sure things that you're using like tungsten and tantalum and so on aren't coming from sources there where they're in Africa in particular, where there's trade in those materials are funding some of the weapons trades there. And then finally, on this sort of quick run through reporting, there's a lot of emphasis in reporting and understanding exactly what our business is. About 16 years ago, Ford began its first sustainability report to be published annually along the same lines as a financial report. Now it's commonplace. There's a whole business of sustainability reporting, and in fact, there's as you may know, there's consultants comparing sustainability reports against each other to check their worthiness and so on. So there's a whole sort of business there. But it does force the very actions of having all this reporting, forces a process through the company on an annual basis to people ask themselves what are they doing, to write down, to look for improvements year on year. So it's all part of the whole topic. Now, emissions, relevance of emissions. My particular interest is in freight emissions. Ford, as a company, we recognize that climate change is impacted by CO2 levels in the atmosphere, of which burning of fossil fuels is a significant contributor. And we're committed to doing our share to prevent or reduce the potential for harm due to climate change. And so we've set emission reduction goals for our products by region and manufacturing operations. Within the supply chain, the reason why it's particularly relevant to logistics is a large proportion of CO2 comes from fuel usage. So actions to save CO2 are really hand in hand and win-win in terms of saving fuel costs as well. So it's another way of looking at your business is looking at CO2 and looking at the differences, and it kind of forces you to consider other options which, once you make the changes, can save you cost. So different aspects, as I say, one of the key ones for a car maker is product sustainability. So I'm not going to go into a lot of detail here, but just to flag up a slide here showing that there are a number of dimensions to sustainability. In any of our cars now, you can pick up a brochure about the impacts. Another aspect, though, is manufacturing, and look at greener manufacturing sites. Had wind turbines, had a wind turbine installed in Dagenham engine plant probably two and a half decades ago, and as anyone who lives around the London area will have seen it. If you're paying attention, you'd see there's now 3. If you're a collector, I don't know if people collect wind turbines, I don't suppose they do, but we've now got 3 there, and they have provide a genuine benefit, and they're sort of putting them in other plants as well. We put solar panels here on Michigan plant. The first ones were put in Bridgend plant in Wales, and a living roof here in Dearborn truck plant. This is an idea that once people started doing it, they found by putting a sort of a layer of plant life on the top of a factory, it helps insulate the factory, as well as providing sort of nesting areas for birds and bees and so on and so forth. Now, one of the reasons I thought this would be sort of interest is because many logistics sites are on brownfield areas where planning permission for things like wind turbines and solar panels are probably pretty easy to get. And so really, you've got sort of ideal locations in many warehouse areas to use some of these technologies. And as I was saying earlier, we're at an age of innovation. Now we're at a point where you can go and look and see which are successful and which are not. You know, these designs have all been evolving over the last couple of decades. Right, onto supply chain sustainability. Well, supply chain for us is we have all our parts, manufacturing parts coming in. And we have a major initiatives in terms of talking to to our supply base, communicating expectations and assessing, as talking about having audits of suppliers' locations and building capability, and then have collaborations. So within the industry, there's sort of collaborations with the various industry bodies and sharing ideas and training and so on, and also sort of in wider spheres. Now, so that was intended to give you a flavour of the different topics that touch on the subject of sustainable supply chains. Let's focus a bit more on logistics. And again, there's a whole range of topics to consider. It's not just there's not just one horse to back. And the kind of areas that we're involved in is freight, as you all know, and the key drivers for here are sort of network planning, a mode equipment choice, a load density, and then we move on to packaging, and probably more about packaging in a moment, I should think, from David's presentation. We look at pack density, reusable packaging, and reducing the stock of packaging and pooling. Inventories, reducing stocks of inventories in themselves saves money, but also reduce the need for warehouse storage. And supply chain management. It's looking at lean supply chains, so we sort of minimize the amount of freight required, having been nimble to change. Premium freight avoidance. I'm a bit wary about that because I very much enjoyed my lunch, in which I was surrounded by a number of premium freight specialists. I can't imagine a world, unfortunately, where we wouldn't need premium freight, but clearly clever planning will help limit the amount we have to spend on aircraft. So, some examples. Here's an example of Fiestas using waterways. This is an exercise where we moved the movement of Fiestas onto the River Rhine. In North America, they use a lot of rail there, rail and intermodal, and looking at planning for maximizing the loads and the rail hubs for working there. And here is an example from Asia Pacific, where they're working on rails again, and here they found an opportunity to increase the efficiency by designing a double-deck rail wagon for transporting our finished vehicles. Right, so I mentioned earlier that one of my particular interests is emissions reporting. So I just thought I'd take you through some of our experiences. It was triggered for us by internal questions of how much overall CO2 footprint is generated by freight. You know, we're very conscious that overall, as a company, our products are burning fuel, and so there's some studies being done as to how much overall the footprint cradle to grave emissions were. And so we needed to look at what element the freight was providing. And so we developed some internal reporting processes. We got involved with various outside bodies, such as Carbon Disclosure Project, and reporting them annually, and with greenhouse gas Scope 3 and ADET. And we got involved in actually developing some of the later guidelines. And then in 2013, there was a kind of step change where there's simultaneously, more or less, there's a new standard for freight reporting was introduced into Europe. And also a French decree was published that required all carriers in France to provide on-demand freight CO2 information to their customers. So that's, with that, we sort of took that extra step, and we've been asking all our carriers in France to provide their freight emissions. And then more recently, we've got involved as various bodies, and in particular as a group, the Global Logistics Emissions Council, which has formed out of various people who've been involved in previous studies to try and develop and improve standards further. And we reached the point now where we're saying, well, we're still out there wondering, we're looking at ourselves as to how best we can develop all this data, but we aren't having it pulled from us. But the European Union, and it's sort of a careful way, it takes a certain amount of time to do these things, is promising a communication on the decarbonisation of the transport sector sometime later this year, mid-year. So, lessons learned from all this exercise on studying emissions. The good news is that meaningful, consistent data can be calculated internally based on real-life transactional freight data. So if you've got the information on all your freight moves, you can produce your emissions estimates. And it allows answers to be provided to interested parties and drives internal debates and good behaviours. So we have various customers ask us on occasion, particularly fleet customers, ask us if we can demonstrate environmental credentials of our business, and we can provide information for that. However, where we're not at, is that there isn't equipment, the trucks don't have the technologies available across the transport fleet to allow actual measurement of total emissions. So we haven't got a mechanism, we just plug something into a lorry that can produce the numbers after each journey. And there's too many assumptions required to allow valid external benchmarking comparisons. So we can produce numbers at the moment, but we use them internally and look at how we're performing year on year. But because of assumptions being made on how the numbers are generated in terms of do you include return shipments, do you include packaging moves, do you include second and third tier suppliers and so on, the company to company, it's not valid. And what we find is that when we ask, and this is particularly the experience with the French carriers, when we went out actively to ask all the French carriers to provide us with their freight CO2 emissions, the individual carriers face issues from the time taken to produce the data, and also because all the customers, they say, are asking for different formats and different information. So really, where we're at is still a lack of fully developed standards and agreement on which approach to use. And the EU direction may cover this. So just to summarise then a couple of slides, there's growing awareness and activities. There's no end of groups being involved and initiatives now to study the whole idea of sustainability in our business. There's various groups who are trying to focus in on which is the best method. And as I say, this group, GLEC in Europe, there's a global group, but this is particularly strong in Europe, looking at the best approach. But really, it's sort of down to how we all feel. How much we use all this is how interested we are. And I mean, it was interesting to me, because I've been very involved in this for a long time, that we had a lot of attendance. There's a huge number of different countries, parts of the recent Paris Climate Conference. And here we have someone who's reasonably significant in terms of his power in the world, politics, saying that he views it as a positive. So when we lead, his comments are, so when there's 200 nations achieving the most ambitious agreement in history to fight climate change, it's important. It helps vulnerable countries and it protects our kids. Now, this slide was taken from Facebook, and I think that kind of summarizes how the world is now, that there's a lot of information out there, there's a lot of trends, and I mean, certainly from my perspective and having watched all this going on, it's a very positive thing to be involved in. It's something that generates data, makes you think the right way, leads to good behaviors in terms of saving money, saving fuel costs and so on, and saving resources. But I think that I'll hand over to the to the other speakers who will give other perspectives. But I think what we'd like to hear at the end of this session is from yourselves how much you buy into this, how much your companies feel that this is something we should be pushing. Right, thank you.
I'll take that this week. Thank you very much, John, for giving us an overview of what Ford are doing from a sustainability point of view as a company, but also specifically on the logistics side. Next up to hear a logistics view, more directly from a logistics company, and what sustainability or sustainable logistics means to them. I'd like to welcome to the podium Kraass, the Chief Operating Officer of Wallenius Wilhelmsen Logistics. Thank you.
Thanks, Luis. Good afternoon, everyone. John, you ended your presentation with a question, how much should you push? I think you should push much harder moving forward on this. I want to see much more coming from the OEMs, making this part of the discussions. When I came in this morning, I was wondering about two things. How many of you will show up for this section of the presentation? And it's amazing if you look around how many people listen to this. Number two for me was, how much do we really care about that? Whenever we have our performance reviews, and if you set your budget, end of the year results, and now in March, we have all done this for 2015. How often did you talk about carbon footprint, CO2 emission, NOx, SOx? I make a guess, very, very little. You talked about results, return of capital employed, growth rates, but you didn't touch on these factors. I believe we do wrong. We are all responsible for that. We can't hide. We can't say this is only up to the customer to decide. We have our role to play. So I want to get out of the next 10 minutes is a little bit of bad conscience in this room. Then I have achieved what I want to achieve. We can do more, and we should do more. When I talk today about our company, I'm not talking about the shipping part only. We do much more. And very often WWL is the shipping company and you do environmentally friendly. We are a logistics company. We have 2.8 million moves outside the shipping part. We have 5,000 people employed on terminals, VPCs, EPCs worldwide. We build right now a new terminal in Australia, Melbourne. This will be the greenest terminal in the world, and I will touch on that during the presentation. So we do much more than shipping. But we believe we have a responsibility to do this. Unfortunately, we talk too little with our customers about that. Sustainability definition I put on one of the slides. It's really to ensure what we do today, it's not compromising our future. And I can give you a couple of examples on the shipping side or on the land side where we compromise our future, where vessels get ordered which doesn't have the newest design, doesn't have the lowest CO2 emission, but the price is attractive. Terminals get developed in the same way, more short-term than long-term focus. It will be part of our discussions moving forward, so I think we can do better there. The goal is, of course, it's environment, but it's together with the social part. And of course, we can't ignore the cost impact. And I'm not saying it should come at any price. But if we all agree on targets, if we measure them and have an ambition goal, we can do this. The latest design of our vessel has reduced the emission by 22%. It was possible. When we went to our board and asked for approval of 6 new, we call them hero vessels, there were 2 discussions, of course, return of capital employed and what do they generate. But what is the CO2 emission, NOx, SOx? What are you going to do there? And one without the other would not have been approved. This is part of our discussions in our company. And we have invested in this. Not only it's a business case on TC results, it's a business case as well to work on a sustainable logistics solution. Can we measure this? Of course, today, relatively easy. This is a CO2 graph over the last couple of years. You see 2009 was the wrong development. This was the financial crisis where the vessels sailed half full around the world. Of course, then the results go up. But you can measure CO2, NOx, SOx, the waste content, electricity consumption. We can all measure this. And everyone in the room and running companies is capable to do this. The question is, do we do this? And if we don't do this, should we do this in the future? We have an interesting example. In 2009, we started to say, okay, let's change the discussion with our customers. Let's not talk only about cost and quality. Quality is given anyhow, time, lead time. Let's bring a 4th dimension into this, carbon emission. And 2 customers volunteered and said, yeah, that's really interesting. We should talk about that. And we were, I think, a project for a year, analyzed the supply chain, not port to port, it was factory to dealer, and brought this element into this, carbon emission. And you don't know what you don't know. There are a lot of surprises. So the outcome was very positive. Wow, great job done. It was an investment from our company, but to be fair as well, our customers have invested with their people skills and looked into the processes. But afterwards, 6 months later, it was not a topic anymore. It was good for discussion towards the boards. It was good for the discussion internally. But when the next RFQ came up, it was not part of the discussion anymore. And then you wonder why we do this if there is no demand on the other side. Because the feedback was very positive. But it looks like we couldn't make the pitch. I don't think we should give up on that. But right now, we have not one project looking into the carbon emission in the full supply chain. As a global company, that's not a good KPI. Of course, we could say we fulfill all the regulatory requirements. And if we talk about shipping, this looks pretty well here. 15 grams per ton kilometer for a small vessel, 8,000 deadweight ton. Our vessels are 20, 25,000, so it's even much better. Trucks, good development on the CO2 side. Positive, a lot has been done. On the terminals, technical services side, I'm not sure if we have done what we could have done in the meantime. NOx and SOx, very little. The ECA areas in Europe have been developed, so there is a need to comply to the new regulations, and we talked about this at many conferences. But at sea, you still can burn heavy fuel oil, 3.5%. Nobody cares about that today. When we come closer to the ports, we do this. I think we should. We should find solutions. But solutions come at a price, it takes time, and that should be a commitment from the OEMs and from the suppliers to develop concepts. When our company merged in 1999, there was a requirement from the owners that we will not bunker any heavy fuel oil above 1.5%. And the reason was sulfur. Sulfur is really something which needs to be reduced significantly. So we did this. We spent quite an enormous amount of millions of dollars over many years. Then, of course, we measured. After 11 years, we reduced the emission by 220,000 tons on sulfur. This is what France consumes during 1 year. If everyone would do it, this would be not France, this would be more than Europe worldwide. So it can be done. The green picture, does the auto industry really want sustainable supply chains? I think we all want it. And it's so good to talk about that. Sometimes you put a green shirt, a green tie on that. But the question is, do we do it? And it's not what we say, it's what we do. And it's a little bit ironic picture I put in here, but it gives a smile. I think that's what we do. It's about the price. It's about the price when we talk to RFQs. And then it's about what else could we do. And quality should be for granted. And we have to be competitive. But there is no dimension about what is your environmental strategy. How can I help you to improve? What do I do from a customer to bring you in a position, maybe through longer term contracts, to enable a better footprint? We don't see this today. We want to see this moving forward. How can we build the culture? We believe it's not so difficult. We can start tomorrow. I think all of us in the room are capable to start very early. It doesn't take a lot of teams. It takes commitment to do this. And then you have a roadmap which brings you to sustainable logistics solution moving forward. The RFQs have to be part of it. It has to be an element in the RFQs when there's a decision made. Who is the preferred partner? KPIs, annual reviews, you can't manage what you don't measure. And John said it, there are different standards. I'd rather start with something and then get better moving forward than start with nothing. And I think we can relatively easy to agree on some standards how we measure that. I lived since many years in Norway, and Norway is very successful with electrical cars. Market share is 17%. I don't know in Europe it's 2 or 3, but 17% Norway is really amazing. So whenever we have customers or friends come around, they look at the cars you see on the number plate, electrical car, EL, and say, wow, why is this? Why is Norway so different? Are you guys so environmentally friendly? Is this such a rich country? No, that's not the driver. It's highly subsidized. The best-selling car is Volkswagen. Number 2 is Tesla, which is a sports car. If you pay the price, which normally afford only a normal family car, but you get a sports car, who would not do this? Of course, Tesla is very attractive there. And you see they're all over the place. But the assumption is wrong that this country is only environmentally friendly. We have beautiful mountains. People like to go into the nature. It's subsidized. First, the price attractive. Number 2, you can park for free in the city. You can use the bus lane, bus and taxi lane. So you save 20, 30 minutes to get to work. And then the brand image, very, very strong. I have a teenager at home, 15 years. He talks about that. He said, wow, our neighbor bought this car. And it's not only looks great, this is very environmentally friendly. And then when you go to the supermarket, and it's not made up the story, you can charge it even for free. Or at the office. You have preferred parking. That makes the difference. So it is driven by the government. It can be driven by OEMs. It can be driven by us. But it all has to come together. And it's a long-term commitment. Should we talk about this seriously moving forward? And I think you heard it. I believe in this. My passion is for that. It has more advantages, definitely than disadvantages. It is not so cumbersome. It's something we can do. It has as well business value. There's one company sitting in this session. They invested in LNG vessels. And wow, that's a commitment. These are the first LNG vessels in Europe. And I give them a lot of credit. But when we work with them, and that's the supplier business partner, that will be part of our contracting moving forward. Because that's what we want to see, that people go the other mile. But we have to live the same. We have then to use our purchasing power to get the right suppliers. But I think that's incredible. I touched on Australia, Melbourne. It's a facility where the government and the Port Authority in Australia decided it's a very fragmented port, we need one Ro-Ro terminal. And that was done in 2012-13 already. So we got awarded, we were lucky. We have built up a new facility, 380,000 square meter, which will be the only car carrying facility or Ro-Ro facility in the Port of Melbourne, which is the biggest port in Australia. When we were sitting together with the Port Authority and went through the tender process, environment, carbon footprint, emission was a big, big topic. So we agreed on certain standards, and maybe that made us successful in the end, because we have a track record as a company that we invest as well in this part, and we believe in that. This will be the highest environmentally friendly terminal in the world. We will have solar panels, we have windmills, we have water recycling system, we measure the energy consumption, and have as well highest standards on quality. We could not have done it on our own. This was together with our partner, the Port Authority. It was very transparent. We are very clear on what we want to deliver. But we agreed on this. The first phase will be now going in operation next month, 19th of April, and the whole terminal is developed end of 2017. You can Google if you want to see this. It's amazing what you can do, but it takes commitment from many sides. I hope we do more in the future. We as a company believe it's a good investment. It drives as well innovation and efficiencies. But if we continue as today, I think we don't take the responsibility we have in this room. Thanks for listening.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Kai. An interesting and heartfelt and honest presentation there. We talked about, or you talked about the air miles, how much is flown in the car industry a little bit. Just because I use the Automotive Logistics Live app, and a quote from the room next door, which was a kind of an inbound session, but the quote there from Bjorn Klippel was that each car maker would never admit it, but each one spends more than $100 million in air cargo every year. So an example of what has to be done, I guess. No one wants to do it. No one wants to spend money on air cargo because it's expensive. But that's the kind of, that's a lot of waste, a lot of not very green logistics that the automotive industry is responsible for. Next up, to give a different perspective, but still focusing very much on sustainability and the importance to their company in the automotive industry, I'd like to welcome to the podium David Mayo, the Vice President of Europe Automotive and Industrial Solutions for Chep. Thank you.
Thanks, Lee. Right, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. It's a pleasure to stand before you to discuss this very important subject today. I believe that John has focused pretty much on the what, data. I see Kai has transitioned from the what to the how. And I believe that what I'm going to talk about this afternoon is why. Why do we do what we do? What do we need to change it to allow the influence of the why to be better with regards to sustainability? So towards a sustainable supply chain. And I think the first question we really have to ask ourselves is not about the data, not about the input, but is, do we really care? Do we care? Now, I'm not going to ask you to put up your hands, because you'll all say yes. The audience in 2014 were actually asked a specific question, which is aligned to what we're talking about today, where if it was two quotes from LSPs, would you go for the one that's slightly cheaper, or would you go for the one offering slightly lower emissions? And 84% said, it's all about the money, baby. That's the reality. Do you really care? So in order to care, perhaps we need to understand the transition from the what to the how to the why, and to really look at what is a sustainable supply chain? And we've come up with this concept, which is probably pretty similar to a lot of yours. And I'm going to start from the right because that's where I believe we should start from. The better planet, the better communities, and the better business. And this touches on what Kai was mentioning a few minutes ago. And the better planet, without being dramatic, really is about the preservation of the Earth. If anybody has got any doubt about that now you can raise your hand. Then, in order to deliver that, we're talking about better communities. We all have the right to be safe. We all have the right to good nourishment and health. And our children have the right for a good future. And that's up to us today, now. And then we have better business. The first two don't mean that business opportunity is less because of it. That is an assumption, and assumptions are often wrong. It is an opportunity to do things better and actually gain more, not only credibility, but profit. So despite, hopefully, what was a bit of a convincing argument, why is this not being achieved? So we're coming now to the why. And I think the diagram is pretty clear to us all. Because it's all about the money, baby. It's all about cost cutting. It's all about saving. And sustainability is seen as an additional cost. It's seen as encroaching on profitability. And one of the primary drivers for that is silo mentality. Now, whether it is silo mentality regarding sustainability, you will all have experienced it within your own companies when discussing a variety of topics, but this one in particular when it comes to funding and finance. So we operate in silo mentalities, we focus on profitability, and we are measured on our performance against that. Now we're coming to the crux of it. Why do we what we do? It's about behavior. So now here's just an example of how we potentially do it today, or how we do it today. We look at the various tiered suppliers all the way down to the consumer. And those are just examples at the bottom. But if all the tier threes think individually, like you guys sitting and ladies sitting at your tables, and then you have your silos, and then you do that at tier twos as well, and then you do it at tier ones, and OEMs and consumers, that means you have automatically suboptimal companies and suboptimal supply chains. Measuring individual elements will drive the wrong behavior. I cannot imagine that's a behavior you really want. Profit as a mindset. That is the culture that we live in today, and our fathers have lived in also, and the grandfathers as well. Is it going to be, as Kai indicated, the way in which people think in the future? Or other things going to start to play more of a role? But if we continue to retain the mindset thinking of profit only, we will all be thinking, what can we do to win? What can we do to gain advantage? What can we do to cut and save? And as a result of that, often things happen then at the end, which means whether it's a callback due to a tier one supplier failing with a part, whether it is simply not collaborating on transportation, that your profitability that you could achieve is reduced by the negative consequence of not working outside of your silos and not working together. So for profitability, the mindset has just changed. It's not about profit, it's about sustainability. And not just sustainability in the sense of emissions, but sustainability in the sense of how does one move oneself and one company forward, but together with others. Together you will be strong, and together you will ensure that you do not negatively influence the next person in the chain or in the other department. That will mean far less opportunity for reverse logistics in order to then maximize the profitability. So how do we change that? Well, I think this is quite a good statement here. We are shackled. It's the habit loop. It's all about budget, routine, and reward. The cue will always be the same. So we have our budgets, we need to perform, we're given targets, we need to achieve. But the routine is commodity trap. It's about product price, which has been indicated by the two previous speakers. And the question is then, it's about what's the best deal I can get in order to achieve my targets with regards to profitability or growth, or both. So the budget process is the trigger for this behavior. The time pressure on what we do and how we do it leads to it. And the reward is all about how much have I achieved financially. We need to change something there, and it'll be the routine. Now, a practical example of what we're not probably doing quite right. Here are 3 packaging solutions. And what's the cheapest solution? One will say one way, one will say reusable, another will say pooling. You will notice that all the cost elements are different. We have spend, we have depreciation, we have fee. So what does the budget holder actually look at, depending on what he's looking at? Does he see the bigger picture? Does he want to see the bigger picture? And are we comparing apples actually with pears? Packaging is more than just buying the cardboard box. It consists of several elements, just several are listed here, there are more, that need to be considered that are often outside the pillar of just, say, purchasing. The cardboard price per part, per car. Let's look at a typical one just to prove the point. The supplier decides to go the one-way packaging route. He pays. The one-way packaging is actually not optimal for the part that he's packing into it, and therefore he's inefficiently packing, and probably there is more damage, be it from bad handling, forklift truck, whatever. He then receives call-off from the OEM he's providing, which isn't actually aligned to what he produces, how he produces, or the quantity that he actually has to deliver, so his trucking is inefficient. Because of the ever-improving quality requirements of the OEMs, powertrain, clean room environments, OEMs have done their line-side back calculations and don't want one-way packaging at the line. Safety issues alone are a reason for not having it there. So there's a cost of repack. There's a cost of storage, and then you get rid of the waste. The OEM, to enable the ability of one-way packaging to the line side, buys his own pool. The handling has been done into his own pool and delivers it to line side. That needs to be managed. It needs to be maintained and repaired. And then he's got to transport it back again, where it is once again handled. And either way, you're going to have waste. Does that look sustainable? Not to me. Is there anybody that thinks that's sustainable? And when you're looking at each one of those individual groups or clusters, you're actually only looking in your own silo. And you're looking at, probably as a purchaser, of 20% of the total cost. The rest is elsewhere, but you don't care. Because your targets and your behavior are driven to achieve something else. But 80% of those costs are elsewhere. So what is the cheapest solution across all of those? You can see we still have the one-way, the in-source, and the reusable. But what you see is the total cost of ownership is down there now. Instead of cash outlay, instead of CapEx, whatever it might be. And considering the entire elements beyond your own silo. So how do you do that then? What is going to encourage one to do that? And it's this creation of awareness, and Kai was touching on it as well, how in Norway, 15-year-olds are talking about awareness. And he also said what actually drove, in that case, awareness, big subsidies. But what we see here is through changing that and creating the awareness, you change the routine. The cue is the same. It's budget process. We've still got to go through it. But now we're talking, instead of something else, commodity trap product price. We're talking total cost of ownership. Working together outside of your silos, within companies, and without the length of the supply chain. And the reward will be sustainability actually driving profitability and return. So measure the right things, believe in the reward, and live that behavior every day. Because if we don't do it, who else will? And why should they? So for us, we believe that measuring the total cost of ownership will, and it does, create sustainable supply chains, because we act as we are measured. So if it's just about the buck, nothing will change, and we will not achieve sustainable supply chains. Thank you.
Thank you very much, David. And once again, another good presentation, very interesting presentation on the importance of supply chain and having a practical look. I do think the question that's really come up in my mind is, do we really care? And I think that's a fundamental one. You know, maybe we sometimes think, you know, why should I care? You know, I had a heart attack at 40, I had a stroke at 50, I doubt if I'll make it to 60, so who cares about sustainability? Then again, I've got children. But I wonder if following the presentation from session 1 about connectivity and Facebook and entertainment in the cars, and I wonder if I really asked my kids, if you had a choice between a car that gives you all this fancy stuff or a greener car, I wonder which one they would choose, even the kids who we think might be a little bit more environmentally friendly. John mentioned earlier, or to me really, that his daughter was really impressed that my twin, George Clooney, obviously, I only had to say my twin and you probably guessed it was George Clooney, when he was giving an Oscar presentation, talked about the importance of sustainability. But do we really care? Do we still go for a convenience? And that's the kids. We're business, or you guys are business people, which makes you even more hard-headed and practical, and whether sustainability really matters. So just a thought from my side. But again, now this is where you make your contribution. If you've got any questions or comments that you want to make, the usual rules, please raise your hand, wait for the microphone, and say your name and your company name. This is why I love the after-lunch sessions. But don't worry, just because you haven't got a question, don't think you're going to go home or get to the coffee break earlier. So I suppose an obvious question, we've covered that a little bit in some of the presentations, but I'll ask the question a bit more directly. In the past, when we talked about sustainability, there was an assumption, whatever it was, that sustainability isn't necessarily a cost. A lot of the things that will make you sustainable, greener, are things that involve efficiency. So therefore, sustainability, it's easy for you guys to say, isn't a cost. It can actually be part of your efficiency program. So is this true? Can a good sustainability program actually be cost efficient?
Well, if I perhaps start on this one. I mean, first I'd say that we are all making our businesses more sustainable each and every day. And, in that, we're all tasked with process improvements, improving freight efficiency, improving packaging density, and so on. But we don't tend to think of them as sustainability initiatives. But the outcome is that we are becoming more efficient. So it's not that we don't do anything. I think what people tend to think of in the sustainability sort of in this kind of discussion is the kind of sort of step changes, the new technologies, the change in directions and so on. And maybe that's what we're not doing as much of as we could do. And I do think one point I would make about, I think I mentioned a bit when talking about the wind turbines, is that even if you don't do things yourselves, you should look around you, because there's an awful lot of people experimenting at the moment. I mean, I think most carriers, somewhere amongst their fleets, will have some kind of hybrid vehicle or some kind of alternative fuels. They're all trying things out. And some of them work, and some of them don't. And the turbines are a good example. A few years ago, they were seen as, well, some people say kind of a white elephant or someone, or something, you put it in there, does it really deliver? In actual fact, sort of year-on-year improvements, they are genuinely useful things to have in the appropriate situations, and you can go and find that out. So I think to answer your question, I think we are, in the course of our business, making them more sustainable. We probably should be braver and taking more jumps to try new things that in turn will deliver as well.
David or Kai?
Yeah, happy to do. So when you talk about efficiency, we should define what is efficiency. If it's limited to port, factory to port, then it's not the efficiency, I think, is the right discussion around sustainable logistics. It has to be this whole supply chain. How do you measure CO2 emission, NOx, SOx emission? What is the value of 100 tons of sulfur? Is it $100,000, $5,000? Are you putting this into the efficiency calculation? I don't think we do it today, so it should not counterproductive in the long term. In the short term, probably it will hit on the efficiency a bit, but the longer term, if we do it right, the efficiency will improve, but includes other elements, how we measure it.
Not quite sure what I want to add to all of that, but I think that, with regards to sustainability, I think that it is a question of measuring the right things. So rather than measuring the plastic bottles into the seat of the Ford F-150, what are we going to do to reduce its dramatic consumption? So I think that it's right to say, what are we going to measure? And I think your approach about saying, well, and so what does that mean, is a critical part of it. But I think, again, for me, it's beyond even that, Louis. To get there, you really need to start talking about behavior. And a colleague of mine showed me a very good TED interview with the Prime Minister of Bhutan. And this guy is country suffering like hell from global warming. The glaciers are melting. They've got nothing to offer, but they do. It's called fast-flowing rivers. And those rivers are actually getting bigger because the ice is melting. Yeah. But the energy that they're producing from their hydroelectric plants, they sell into the two massive populations of China and India and reduce massive amounts of emissions as a result somewhere else. So they're not only carbon neutral, they're carbon negative. That's where we need to go.
Mm-hmm. Okay. There's a question from this side.
Afternoon. Matthew Dadson, Volgan Nepa Group. Question really for Wallenius, and I suppose for Ford as well. If for Wallenius, your vessels, you explained on a slide how your CO2 emissions gram per tonne were decreased, and it showed a decrease. But overall, if you're running more vessels or have more trade lanes, does not your CO2 total into the atmosphere increase, in fact, if you have more vessels and more lanes, even though the vessels are more efficient? And maybe the same for Ford. Ford are selling more and more vehicles and more hybrids. And even though that's the case, individually the car's producing less CO2. If you're selling more cars, doesn't the total CO2 from your company increase?
If you don't mind, I answer the first one. And you are correct. Moving forward, the trend, CO2 reduction over many years, we can question if this can continue. Even 2015, we did a 2% improvement. Moving forward, we see the trade fragmentation coming in. More discharge ports, more loading ports. Countries in the past, like Mexico, is one of the strongest export countries, Thailand. So we will have more loading ports. And if you look at the statistics, significant increase, 15-20% year by year. If we don't think then about hub and spoke systems, I agree with you, the CO2 emission will increase. NOx and SOx will increase as well. And even post-Panamax design vessels, which have a capacity increase of 20%, they will not cater for that. So back to the other solutions, sure there are, but the world around is changing. And if we have the same approach as we had for many years, it will not give us what we should ask for.
I think it's absolutely right, and I think that the global supply chains are actually growing, so it's going to continue. It's not going to get less. But I think that, again, it's a question of thinking about what's happening ahead. The greatest trends in the fast-moving consumer goods industries today are ever more delivery direct to home. People don't want to go shopping anymore. And as a result of that, industries like food industries are looking at how do I create one mouth packaging for single people, two mouth packaging for couples, and then family packaging. And how are we going to cope then with the additional logistic requirement of delivering all of that? So if we don't talk about it today in all the senses of becoming more efficient per vehicle, but also in the sense of expanding supply chains, but also knowing that the trend is coming, that people don't want to go to the pool, which actually is a shop, but they now want everything delivered to them, we have a logistics challenge. So if we don't start to think about it today, the problem is definitely going to get worse.
Okay, thank you. Another question from this side?
It's working. And this was not a curveball, so thank you very much. One piece of observation is there's an overcapacity on the container trade, and what do the shipping lines do? They say, well, it's cheaper to run via the Cape than go through the Suez Canal, because the fuel, the bunker is so cheap, so that's the choice that we make. So I think everybody is pretty much in the same boat, that it's driven by money. The other side of it is, to Kai's point, I think a lot of things are driven by the regulatory environment and predominantly by tax incentives or penalties. And we saw it in the automotive industry when the European Union changed their position from being neutral from an emission point of view, so it was a well-to-wheel, to be tailpipe measurement, which is a political decision that by the decision is also flawed, because all the brown coal CO2 that's being generated in Germany in order to produce the electricity that you put in the battery that you use in the car count as zero when it comes out of the tailpipe. So my point is, I think we can talk about this until the cows come home. I don't think a whole lot will change in 10 years because we're all going to be driven by cost and by tax and by what the politicians believe will generate votes. So it's difficult, and I know in our company, when I do balance buy and you have a number of different elements to it, including stability of the company and cost and quality and whatever, there is no line talking about sustainability or what is the green label of the supplier that we look at. It just doesn't exist. But if there are some of the other OEMs that has it in your balance buy process that sustainability or CO2 footprint is part of the decision process, I'd like to hear about it, because then maybe we should introduce it. And that will drive potentially some change. So a few comments from my side, and sorry, as always, I can't keep my mouth shut, but that's the way it is.
Thank you, Jürgen. We do appreciate your comments, but you've obviously learned that you might as well decide to speak yourself before I pick on you anyway. So, no, thank you. Very, very valid points. I'm not sure. It was a comment more than anything, so I'm not sure if there's anything to add to that. But are there any more questions? Question at the front. Really need to get younger staff.
Thank you, Alistair.
What do you mean I would be in trouble if we were getting younger staff?
Mike Sturgeon, ECG. It's another comment, not a question, so you can relax. It was just to say that next month there's, I'm not sure if it's all the OEMs, but certainly a number of the OEMs through CSR Europe in Brussels have organised a sustainable supply chain forum, which I know a great many of the LSPs have been invited to. So for me, this is a first. And I think, Kai, you made the comment that you'd like to see the OEMs doing more to encourage. It seems that this is maybe a step in the right direction. I know they're getting something like 100 people together in Brussels for a day's session, and we've been asked to go and support that. So I'll be very interested to see how that goes and what direction it leads in.
Thank you. And for anybody who is in the finished vehicle logistics industry, it's unlikely that you don't know ECG. But if you don't, then they really are an important industry in this. Firstly for your industry, but also in this respect. So please make sure you're in communication with them to improve this amongst other areas for the automotive industry. Any more questions? Okay, well, we're kind of running over time anyway a little bit because we started a bit late. I've had a couple of notes that have come through. Firstly, again, the value of the Automotive Logistics live stream. My daughters sent through a message to me saying that it was Leonardo DiCaprio who was talking about sustainability in his Oscar speech, and said apparently I don't look like him. Obviously, because I look more like George Clooney. I can't look like both of them. Oh, for those of you who couldn't see, the comment was Danny DeVito, so I'm not sure where the connection, where the similarity is there. So sustainability, I think we've discussed that it's important, but it should become more important. It's part of our daily lives through the efficiencies that we're trying to find, whether it's in cube utilization or using more efficient equipment and packaging. It's in our daily lives anyway, but perhaps it needs to be pushed higher up on the agenda. Maybe our only hope or our main hope will be that someone who's really keen on the environment and super green and really wants to move the world forward, when President Trump comes into power, maybe that's what's going to make all of the difference. But otherwise, I hope you enjoyed this session. I hope you have a green and pleasant couple of days, and that you enjoy our coffee outside. We're all back in the main room for the final session, looking at the future of the manufacturing 4.0 in effect. So, yeah, please do.
Apologies, just as you're getting ready for your coffee, but I just, having listened to some of the questions and thoughts, I just personally would like to make a closing comment, which is to say that I think as a group, the logistics industry, we've all been let off the hook in the last few years. Because one of the things I have done is I've sat in a couple of governments, a UK government committee, the Department for Transport and DEFRA, looking at the idea of CO2. And we all know that the European Union has made commitments to reduce overall emissions within the community over the next few years up to 2020 and 2050. And having spoken to some of the politicians, they know that freight logistics is a major contributor to that. However, they're not able to quantify it. And because of that, we've been let off the hook. Because I'm quite convinced, if you say take the manufacturing plants, all our manufacturing plants already are duty-bound to report their CO2 emissions each year. And as a part of that, there's a sort of a reporting mechanism, and there's a drive to improve it year on year. We haven't had to do that purely because it's been an unquantifiable number so far. Now, the French government have begun by pushing their carriers, and there have been various issues of the consistency of reporting and so on over there. But I think it's in this void where we're not being told to do it by legislation that really it's an opportunity for us to work hard, understand the business, understand what we can do, so we're healthy, we're fighting fit and ready for it, because I think it's going to come. Because I can't see how the governments can make their commitments come in the next coming decades without seriously addressing this topic.
Mm-hmm. Okay, good point. And maybe an unsophisticated kind of vote. Who within your companies have got very specific corporate sustainability policies and goals? If you can raise your hand, and if it's really one of your corporate goals within your company. Okay, not enough, I would say. And secondly, perhaps we can do it by raising your hand if you think 1.1, or keep your hands down if you think 0.2. For those of you, please raise your hand if you think I look more like George Clooney, but keep your hands down if you think I look like Danny DeVito. Is the microphone working? I'm not sure people could... Okay, well, thank you very much. Thank you very much to the panel for a great session. Thank you.